June 4, 1943. Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas. Unificia Vera Burkhart's hand shook as he scrawled in his secret diary, aware that discovery would mean punishment. The Americans can't possibly be this prosperous. Yet the evidence glimmered before him. Through the train window, the night was alive with electricity. Farmhouses, streetlights, shop windows, everywhere lights burned, a vast network stretching across the Texan plains at 10 o'clock. In Germany, darkness had been law for years. Blackout rules and incomplete rural electrification kept most villages in shadow. And yet here, in the land the Nazis dismissed as decadent and broken, power flowed freely. 1,850 soldiers of the Afrika Korps disembarked from comfortable Pullman coaches, their train not a grim transport of livestock, but a vessel of plush cushions, dining tables, and private sleeping compartments. The citizens of Mahia had come out in full, unaware they were witnessing a turning point, not of battles, but of belief. American industrial might, displayed in plain sight, would dismantle the worldview these men carried with them. Victory, they would realize, was being defined in factories, not just on the front lines. The process had begun weeks earlier, in Tunisia. General Jurgen von Arnim surrendered with 250,000 Axis troops, the desert veterans who had once pushed British forces back to Egypt now disarmed. Among them, Headman Friedrich Radke, a decorated officer and twice wounded veteran, would later leave a diary that historians would mine for insights into the collapse of German morale under American control. The port of Oran, Algeria, became the first stage of transformation. Soldiers waited in tents and makeshift pens, but even here the efficiency of the Americans was evident. Paperwork, medical checks, inoculations, and explanations of rights, all conducted smoothly in fluent German. The prisoners began to grasp that these captors operated on a scale they had never imagined. Food delivered the first shock. Hans Muir of the 21st Panzer Division recalled months later. The rations were generous, fresh, and regular, bread, coffee, meat, far surpassing anything endured in the desert. It was not spectacle, it was standard procedure. Even the ships that carried them revealed the depth of American capacity. Liberty vessels, constructed at astonishing speed, moved back from supply runs packed with human cargo, not emptiness. The Atlantic crossing became a lesson in abundance. Sailors discarded provisions by the ton, oblivious to waste, while prisoners marveled at the scale of production that made such excess routine. Engines built in factories scattered across dozens of states, parts assembled in ports barely existing 2 years prior, and radar equipment standard even on cargo ships. It was all a tangible argument. This was a nation of resources beyond reckoning. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, a descendant of Prussian military tradition, later reflected on that approach to the American coast. The ship's technology, the seamless organization, the very efficiency of the machinery, was unlike anything the Wehrmacht had ever seen. It was then that I first realized Germany might have already lost the war. The first glimpse of America shattered every illusion of weakness I had carried since leaving home. At Norfolk, the docks stretched for miles, cranes moving in unbroken rhythm, loading and unloading dozens of ships simultaneously. In a single day, this port handled more cargo than Hamburg could in an entire week. Gerrit Jon Baer, a former factory worker from the Ruhr, counted 47 ships in motion, each crane lifting loads that in Germany would have required teams of men and horses. Here, the work was powered by electricity, clean, constant, efficient, without the choking smoke that plagued our factories. As prisoners were marched toward the waiting trains, we passed parking lots brimming with civilian cars. Ordinary workers drove themselves to work, a sight unimaginable back home, where private vehicles were a luxury of the wealthy or the party elite. But the trains themselves left us speechless. These were not boxcars or cramped wagons of war, but full passenger coaches, padded seats converting into sleeping berths, dining cars set with polished silverware and white linens, observation cars with wide, panoramic windows. Headman Radke later wrote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." Even the guards seemed aware of the contrast, one apologizing lightly that the air conditioning in our car was not fully functional, a luxury that in Germany existed only on Hitler's personal train. The 3-day journey from Norfolk to camps in Texas and Oklahoma would erode Nazi preconceptions far more effectively than any battlefield defeat. As the train moved through Virginia, prisoners pressed against the windows, seeing towns and factories illuminated as if by magic. Small communities glowed with electric lights, shop windows gleamed, houses shone in multiple rooms, factories worked night shifts, and parking lots were full even at midnight. Hans Muir, whose father had been a Nazi bloc leader in Hamburg, wrote years later, "Every city we passed had more electricity than all of Hamburg." Told that this was normal in American towns since the 1920s, he refused to believe it. The guard simply shrugged. "You'll see." At a stop in Roanoke, we watched railway workers complete in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours in Germany. Coal was loaded automatically, water pumped electrically, machinery lubricated mechanically. Even the workers themselves displayed casual wealth: sturdy leather boots, glass bottles of soda tossed into bins without thought, cigarettes stubbed out mid-smoke. Heinrich Müller, an electrical engineer, later calculated that the yard alone consumed more power in 1 hour than his entire Berlin district used in a day. Lights burned in empty buildings, fans ran in vacant rooms, a demonstration of resources without limit. Crossing into Tennessee and Kentucky, industrial power became overwhelming. Vast factories stretched for miles, far larger than anything in Germany. The Alcoa aluminum plant consumed more energy than the entire city of Munich. Near Louisville, the Rubbertown complex rose from fields cleared only 18 months earlier, 4 massive synthetic rubber plants producing 800,000 tons annually, far beyond Germany's peak output of 120,000 tons. Erich Hoffmann, a chemist, later reflected, "Each facility was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were dozens more scattered across the country." Even the Ford Willow Run plant loomed on the horizon, a symbol of industrial might beyond comprehension. One factory alone, completed in just 9 months, produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every hour. At peak output, 42,000 workers assembled aircraft from over 1.5 million parts supplied by 1,500 subcontractors. The facility sprawled across millions of square feet and consumed more electricity than the entire city of Cologne. Hunman Verli, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down in Tunisia, pressed his face against the train window as we passed, counting 17 bombers in various stages of assembly. We had been told American planes were flimsy and hastily made, destined to crumble in combat. Yet here was proof of careful precision, of engineering that was not inferior but astonishingly fast. As the train pushed further into the heart of America, every stop further unraveled Nazi mythology. Crossing the Mississippi at St. Louis, we watched barges carrying grain enough to feed entire German cities for months, their elevators stretching along the river banks. Unreisha Karl Schmidt, a Bavarian farmer's son, later wrote, "The Americans move food like we move ammunition, endless, without care for loss. I saw one barge loaded with enough wheat to feed my village for 5 years. The crane operator ate a sandwich thicker than our weekly ration." In Kansas City, the train paused at enormous stockyards. Tens of thousands of cattle waited for slaughter, and the scent of meat hung over the city. German prisoners, used to subsisting on mere grams of meat per week in Africa, watched workers eat beef sandwiches as if it were bread. Paul Fisher, recalling the scene, noted the surreal abundance. The guard even bought hamburgers for prisoners, paying casually with $1, as though such plenty were unremarkable. Arrival at Camp Hearn, Texas, introduced the next shock. Built in only 4 months, it housed thousands in conditions surpassing civilian norms. Wooden barracks boasted electric lighting, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heat. The hospital stunned even medical officers among us. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, later testified that the facilities rivaled, and in some cases exceeded, those of German civilian hospitals, X-ray machines, surgical instruments, and medicines unavailable in Germany for years. Penicillin, the miracle drug we had only heard about, was used freely, even for minor infections. The camp kitchen further illustrated American abundance. Walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges capable of feeding 5,000 men revealed a scale unimaginable in Germany. Daily rations included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and white bread, foods German civilians had not regularly seen since 1939. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former Munich hotel chef, recalled the horror of excess. "We threw away more food in a day than my family had seen in 3 years. Perfectly good bread, discarded simply because regulations required a surplus to ensure everyone received their full ration. I watched it go to waste." By September 1943, labor shortages led to the deployment of prisoners to farms and factories nationwide. Blindfolds and restrictions were unnecessary, they saw it all. Endless fields of corn and wheat, factories operating 3 shifts, shops filled with goods, houses equipped with refrigerators and radios. At a cotton gin near Houston, Herbert Lang watched a single machine process more cotton in 1 hour than his village could in a month by hand. Powered by electricity from the Colorado River Authority, the gin exemplified rural electrification, which by 1943 reached 90% of Texas farms. The farmer was an ordinary man, not aristocracy or party official, yet he had running water, power, a truck, a car, and a tractor. His workers, including black laborers, enjoyed lunches that surpassed German weekly rations. Every farm we passed mirrored this reality. In Nebraska, prisoners labored in sugar beet fields, witnessing mechanization that replaced hundreds of men, with fields stretching farther than entire German counties. The farmers spoke casually of harvests that would have been impossible in Germany, 60 bushels of wheat per acre, compared with Germany's best yield of 30. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, assigned to a farm outside Scottsbluff, noted in his diary, the farmer's 16-year-old son drove a tractor worth more than everything his father had earned in a lifetime. When Hoffmann commented on it, the boy just laughed. That tractor wasn't even the best. A new John Deere model was on the way. Even more striking were the revelations for prisoners sent to work near or inside American factories. While Geneva Convention rules forbade direct war production, prisoners were permitted to work in civilian industries, freeing American workers from military projects. Thousands of German soldiers thus witnessed American industrial power firsthand. At a Campbell's soup plant in New Jersey, they watched production lines process more tomatoes in a single day than most German factories handled in a month. With a skeleton crew of women and elderly men, production exceeded pre-war levels. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Vanner, who had worked in a German food factory, documented the scene: automated conveyors, filling machines, steam cookers running hundreds of cans at once. One elderly woman oversaw controls that in Germany would have required 50 men, all while sipping coffee and listening to the radio. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal glimpsed the automotive industry's transformation to war production. Across the water, the River Rouge complex employed 100,000 workers making jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. Oberreiter Franz Kellner recorded seeing parking lots full of workers' cars, ordinary employees with vehicles, something almost unimaginable in Germany. Some owned 2 cars, one for work, one for family. At first, we thought the guards were mocking us. By winter 1943, these experiences had profound effects. American intelligence officers labeled the phenomenon ideological collapse syndrome. Prisoners increasingly requested access to newspapers, books, and educational materials. Major Paul Nolan reported that by December, the most fervent Nazis had grown silent. Loyalty to Germany remained, but talk of victory disappeared. Even camp newspapers, produced by prisoners, shifted from defiant nationalism to discussions of democracy, economics, and post-war reconstruction. Lieutenant Hermann Gutz, captured with the 10th Panzer Division, wrote in a letter intercepted by American authorities, "We were told America was weak, divided, and controlled by Jews. Every day here proves the opposite, the most organized, unified, and capable nation on earth. We were deceived by criminals." An unexpected blow to Nazi ideology came from observing Italian prisoners after Italy's surrender in September 1943. Italians who cooperated were organized into service units with better quarters, higher pay, and greater freedom. German soldiers watched former allies working alongside Americans, eating in restaurants, even courting local women. Hetman Friedrich Schultz noted, "The Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated better than we treated them. They work freely, earn money, send packages home. The Americans show them no hatred. This democracy we were taught to despise appears more honorable than our own system." Christmas 1943 dealt the final psychological shock. American churches, civic groups, and organizations sent 500,000 packages to prisoners: candy, cigarettes, toiletries, and games. Communities invited prisoners to dinners, while choirs performed German carols and locals sent homemade cookies. Boy Scouts delivered handmade cards. Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose brother had died in Hamburg's bombing, wrote, "They know we are their enemies, yet they show Christian charity, genuine kindness, not propaganda. Only those completely secure in their power act this way." The Christmas feast itself was unimaginable: turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, and ice cream, quantities of food Germany had not seen since before the First World War. Feldwebel Hansa recorded, "We ate like kings, unable to comprehend such resources lavished on our enemies." The prisoners quickly realized that even the simplest American meals surpassed anything German generals or party officials could expect at home, and this was considered ordinary. Guards explained that every American family celebrated Christmas with similar abundance. If enemy soldiers received such feasts, what must the U.S. military eat? By early 1944, over 40,000 German prisoners had enrolled in educational programs. They studied English, American history, mathematics, and the sciences. The University of Chicago offered correspondence courses, while Stanford sent professors to lecture on democracy and economics. The thirst for knowledge was insatiable. Soldiers who had been told Americans were uncultured barbarians discovered vast libraries, universities welcoming all social classes, and scientific research leading the world. American newspapers offered multiple viewpoints, something impossible in Nazi Germany. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist conscripted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended lectures on atomic physics at Camp Shelby. He later wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught without hatred. Science was presented as universal, belonging to all humanity. They were years ahead of German research, and shared it with us openly. This generosity was incomprehensible to minds shaped by Nazi ideology." Camp theaters showed Hollywood films, not propaganda. Prisoners watched Gone with the Wind, witnessing depictions of American struggle, defeat, and recovery that mirrored their own experiences. The grapes of wrath amazed them. Here, Americans displayed self-criticism openly. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote, "They show their failures and conflicts, yet this honesty makes them stronger. In Germany, such critique would mean death. Here, it is patriotic." Spring 1944 expanded labor programs as American production peaked. Prisoners worked in canneries, mills, and factories, witnessing industrial might firsthand. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, they helped unload steel for D-Day landing craft. Workers assembled 700 boats per month, each with 20,000 parts. The factory employed 20,000 people, including thousands of women operating cranes, welding hulls, and managing production lines. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann recorded, "Women doing men's work, black workers operating complex machinery, teenagers running drilling equipment, everything we were told was impossible in a democracy. Yet production never stopped, 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They built more boats in a month than our entire Navy could in a year." At Republic Steel in Ohio, prisoners saw 10,000 tons of steel produced daily. Blast furnaces ran nonstop, fed by trains of iron ore from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. Oberreiter Paul Hartmann, who had worked in German steel before the war, wrote, "I thought I understood industry, but this was beyond imagination. They wasted more steel and spillage than we could produce. Workers complained about overtime while producing amounts we could never achieve, even with forced labor and double shifts. The summer 1944 harvest revealed the full scale of American agricultural power. Prisoners across the Midwest witnessed farms capable of feeding the world. In Kansas, single farms produced more wheat than entire German provinces. Combines moved like ships across oceans of grain, harvesting 100 acres per day, and elevators held more wheat than Germany imported in a year. Unteroffizier Franz Baer, a farmer from East Prussia, wrote, "One American farm with machinery does the work of 100 German farmers. They showed me aerial photographs, thousands of square miles of wheat. They could lose half their harvest and still have more than all of Europe combined." In California's Central Valley, prisoners picked fruit in orchards stretching beyond the horizon. Perfectly good fruit was discarded for minor blemishes or plowed under to maintain prices, a concept that shocked prisoners from famine-stricken Germany. Gerhard Otto Schultz wrote, "Mountains of oranges bulldozed into pits because there were too many. We begged to send them home to our families, but the guards explained it was impossible. This waste proved they had unlimited resources." June 6, 1944, when news of the Normandy invasion reached the camps, the final ideological collapse occurred. The operation scale, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave, revealed American organizational capacity far beyond anything the Germans had imagined. Within days of D-Day, prisoners at Camp Shelby watched newsreels of the invasion. Ships stretched endlessly across the horizon, artificial harbors in place, and a supply system delivering 15,000 tons daily across open beaches. They saw their homeland overwhelmed by the nation they had been taught was too weak to resist. Friedrich von Tauben later wrote, "We realized then that all was lost, not only the war, but the entire Nazi project. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial myths, sending horses against trucks, rifles against automatic weapons, courage against unlimited resources. Yet the most profound challenge to Nazi ideology came not from machinery or wealth, but from American humanity. Prisoners saw mercy and compassion where they had expected cruelty. When Gefreiter Hans Miller's son died in the Hamburg bombings, the camp commander personally delivered the Red Cross message and offered condolences. When Lieutenant Paul Fischer's wife struggled to feed their children, American church groups sent packages to her in Germany. Hedman Otto reflected, "They separated the German people from the Nazi regime. They fought Hitler, not Germans. At first it seemed propaganda, but it was genuine. They prepared us to rebuild Germany, not to destroy it." Medical care left a lasting impression. German doctors worked alongside American staff, learning new techniques and using equipment far beyond what was available back home. Prisoners received operations that would have been reserved for German elites, and mental health treatment, virtually unknown in the Wehrmacht, was provided to traumatized soldiers. Dr. Friedrich Bauer wrote, "Suicide attempts were met with counseling, mental breakdowns with therapy, not punishment. This care toward enemies revealed a strength we had never understood, true power rooted in confidence, not fear." By March 1945, the re-education program had achieved remarkable results. Over 25,000 prisoners had enrolled in courses on democracy. Camp newspapers published articles on constitutional government, free markets, and civil rights. Discussion groups debated Germany's future. Fanatical Nazis who had arrived months earlier now wrote essays on democratic reconstruction, while officers who had sworn oaths to Hitler considered how American agricultural methods might benefit post-war Germany. August Hermann Göring, in a 1975 interview, admitted, "Not through coercion or propaganda, but through observation. We saw it work. We saw ordinary people living better than German aristocracy. We wanted that for Germany." The transformation was so complete that authorities worried some prisoners had become too enamored with American ways. Many requested to remain in the United States. Others married American women through correspondence programs. Thousands would eventually emigrate in the 1950s. April 1945 brought the final revelation. As American forces liberated concentration camps, footage was shown to prisoners. Initially, many refused to believe it, calling it propaganda, but evidence, photographs, newsreels, letters from home, was undeniable. The psychological impact was catastrophic. Soldiers who had clung to some sense of German honor faced the moral collapse of their nation. Headman Walter Schmidt summarized, "We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples. In reality, we were the barbarians. The Americans we had called weak and decadent showed us what civilization truly meant." By May 1945, as the war ended, German prisoners prepared for repatriation with mixed feelings. They had seen an America that contradicted everything they had believed. They had eaten better as captives than as soldiers and been treated with more dignity by enemies than by their own government. In their final months, they received vocational training, agricultural education, and political instruction. They learned about the Marshall Plan before it was formally announced, understanding that America intended to rebuild, not punish, Germany. Friedrich von Tauben recorded, "They gave us skills, knowledge, hope. They transformed defeated soldiers into future citizens." Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German prisoners were repatriated from American camps. They returned to a Germany shattered, divided, and impoverished, but they carried with them something far more valuable than material goods: knowledge of how a democratic, industrial society could function. The German prisoners who had witnessed American prosperity became unexpected agents of change in post-war Germany. They had seen industrial precision, agricultural efficiency, and civic freedom in action. They knew Reconstruction was possible because they had seen a society that had achieved it. Many former prisoners rose to prominence during West Germany's rebuilding. Hans Kroll, once held at Camp Shelby, became ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who had taught classes at Camp Co., eventually led the European Commission. Rudiger von Marr, detained at Camp Herne, became Germany's permanent representative to the United Nations. Edward Ackermann, a prisoner at Fort Robinson, emerged as a leader in German agricultural reform. They brought American methods to German factories, efficiency to farms, and democratic principles to politics. The economic miracle of the 1950s was built in part on knowledge gained within American prison camps. "We learned that prosperity comes from freedom, not conquest," Hans Kroll reflected. "Democracy created wealth, diversity brought strength, and treating workers well increased production. These lessons shaped the new Germany." Historians have described the German prisoner experience in America as one of the most successful re-education programs in history. There was no coercion, no traditional propaganda. Instead, American industrial might and civic values demonstrated their power through example. Prisoners observed society functioning at peak efficiency while enemies were treated with dignity. They witnessed industrial output that made German production appear primitive and a standard of living that exposed Nazi promises as fantasy. Dr. Arnold Kramer, a leading historian of German POWs in America, concluded, "America won the propaganda war not through slogans, but through reality. Every full meal, every electric light, every working toilet argued against Nazism. Prisoners were converted by prosperity." Statistics reinforced the transformation. Of 371,683 German POWs held in America, fewer than 1% attempted escape, totaling just 2,222 attempts. Post-war surveys found that 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent. Thousands maintained correspondence with American families for decades. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, more than 500 former prisoners returned to Austin, Texas, bringing families to see where their transformation had begun. Former Arbeiter Hans Vea, held at Fort Robinson and later a physician in Maine, recalled, "Life in the camps was a vast improvement for those of us from cold water flats in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating, abundant food, and above all, dignity." Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Meyer, who had worked on Iowa farms, added, "The farmers treated us not as enemies, but as young men far from home. They shared meals, knowledge, sometimes even their homes. This humanity, from people whose sons were fighting against us, changed us forever." At the reunion dinner, 78-year-old Oberst Hermann Gutz delivered the keynote. We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from hatred, but from diversity, not from tyranny, but from freedom. We witnessed the arsenal of democracy at full capacity. Farmers produced food for the world, workers built the tools of victory, and citizens treated enemies with dignity. America's true weapon was not bombs or tanks, but its inexhaustible capacity for creation and its unshakable confidence. We returned to Germany determined to build a society that could create rather than destroy, to prosper through peace rather than war. The Germany that rose from the ashes was built on lessons learned in American camps. We who came as conquerors left as students, former enemies now friends. Thank you for showing us the way. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. Americans and Germans together, former enemies united in recognition of a transformation that had seemed impossible when those first trains rolled into Texas in June 1943. The scale and success of the German prisoner experience in America remain evident in the stark statistics and enduring human legacy. Across 45 states, every state except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont, America built over 500 camps to house Axis prisoners of war. Of these, 175 were main camps, supported by 325 branches, each designed to hold between 250 and 12,000 prisoners. Construction averaged just 90 days per camp. By war's end, 371,683 German prisoners were held in the United States, part of a total of 425,871 Axis POWs. Population peaked in May 1945, with monthly arrivals averaging 20,000 in 1943, rising to 30,000 after D-Day, and reaching 60,000 in the final months of the conflict. Prisoners provided critical labor in 46 states, 14 million man-days of agricultural work, 100 million board feet of lumber processed, with a labor value of $230 million, earning roughly 80 cents per day. Escape was virtually impossible. Out of more than 371,000 prisoners, only 2,222 attempted it, none permanently. Most were recaptured within 24 hours, and no civilians were harmed. Education flourished. Over 40,000 prisoners enrolled in courses ranging from English to sciences, with 30,000 studying English, 15,000 in vocational programs, and 8,000 taking university correspondence courses. Prisoners produced 135 camp newspapers. After the war, roughly 5,000 former POWs immigrated to the United States, while over 12,000 maintained correspondence with American families, on average for 31 years, and many returned as visitors or business partners. 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent, 74% acknowledged that captivity had positively changed their worldview, and 61% expressed genuine interest in democracy. By 1945, fewer than 10% retained strong Nazi convictions. The German prisoners did not merely witness history, they were transformed by it. Captivity became education. Defeat became enlightenment. Imprisonment became liberation from the ideological chains of Nazism. America's greatest victory was not measured on battlefields, but within the camps, where the evidence of democratic prosperity accomplished what armies could not: the complete transformation of enemy minds. Those who arrived believing in German superiority and American weakness left knowing the truth. Industrial power was not only overwhelming, it was inconceivable to minds shaped by scarcity and totalitarian rule. The trains that had carried them into captivity in 1943 brought warriors of the Reich. The ships returning them to Germany in 1946 carried architects of democracy. They had seen the future, and it worked. The story of German prisoners in America is a testament to a profound truth. The most potent weapon in America's arsenal was not its bombs, tanks, or ships, but the undeniable demonstration of a free society's capacity to create abundance. POWs were awed by American industrial might, but ultimately converted by it. From this transformation sprang the seeds of Europe's post-war redemption and the final defeat of the Nazi dream. They returned not as vanquished enemies, but as witnesses to what free societies could achieve. The economic miracle of 1950s West Germany rested in part on lessons learned in these camps: that prosperity comes from freedom, not conquest, that human dignity surpasses racial ideology, that democratic cooperation outperforms authoritarian control. The prisoners had expected to find a weak, divided nation, teetering on collapse. Instead, they encountered an industrial colossus paired with remarkable humanity. They arrived as captives and left as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy at full strength. Their awe at American abundance planted the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and Germany's democratic reconstruction. They had seen America, and they would never be the same. Their children would grow up in a Germany allied with the United States, a partnership rooted in transformation that began when the first Africa Corps veterans stepped off trains in Mexia, Texas, in June 1943, discovering that everything they had believed was wrong. The story of German POWs in America is ultimately one of redemption through revelation. Some of the greatest victories are not achieved through destruction, but through demonstration, not by propaganda, but by prosperity, not through hatred, but through humanity. Soldiers who witnessed American industrial and civic power became inadvertent ambassadors of democracy, returning home with seeds of change that blossomed into one of history's most successful reconstructions. Their journey from Nazi warriors to democratic citizens remains among the most remarkable transformations of the modern era, accomplished not by force, but by the overwhelming example of what free people can achieve when they work together. This was America's secret weapon, not merely the capacity to build more tanks and planes than any nation in history, but the ability to convert enemies into friends through the simple, undeniable power of example. In witnessing American industry and society, German POWs were not only stunned, they were changed, and in that change lay the foundation for a better world. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. See you in the next video.